Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
In headlines coming out of Europe this past week, we saw rising energy prices, particularly for natural gas. In the Dutch market, over the course of 2 days, there was a 60% increase in the wholesale pricing. This was on top of and above a 280% increase in that market since the beginning of the year. So clearly, natural gas pricing is way beyond normal parameters. Now, the question for us is, why is this happening, and what are the economic and policy implications as a result of it? Okay, first, it's very difficult to explain market behavior. This is the wholesale energy market, and it's a complex system made up of many different competing factors and participants. Many of these participants are humans who sometimes do not act rationally. So it's not really possible to pinpoint cause and effect for what's causing the market to react the way it is. But like any market, we can surmise a few possible contributing factors. When we see price increases in a free market, that can be due to increased demand or constraints upon supply. And in this case, we see both occurring at the same time. On the demand side, October is the beginning of the winter heating season throughout most of Europe. Additionally, natural gas is used quite heavily in industrial applications. And as we emerge from the pandemic shutdowns, increased demand through ramping up of industrial uses has certainly been prevalent. On the supply side, there is a low inventory of natural gas currently. In addition to that, most of the European supply comes from Russia through a land pipeline across Ukraine. In September, those volumes were slightly decreased, causing some to question whether or not Russia will continue to supply Europe throughout the winter. So together, this increased demand and constraints upon supply are forcing pricing upward. The upward pressures on pricing is likely to continue through the winter. At least that's my economic forecast. Having said that, what are the policy implications as a result? I see at least three. The first is that this is definitely an additional headwind on the European recovery. We've already begun to experience transitory inflation due to supply chain disruption, and this certainly is not going to help. So look for greater persistent inflation, or at least the threat thereof. Number two, once these inflationary pressures are being monitored closely by the European Central Bank, and just last month, President Christine Lagarde made her announcement of a recalibration, although she was clear to say the lady isn't tapering. But now, with greater inflationary pressure, we might see more movement within the central banks, perhaps a tendency to raise interest rates sooner than originally expected. And then third, in policy implications, is government intervention. So the governments of Europe are already responding to these price movements. Spain has redirected energy company profits to consumers and established a price fixing or a cap on prices. France and the UK are considering payments directly to households. And for its part, Russia has promised to continued supply levels, which had a briefly calming effect on the market. But Vladimir Putin took the opportunity to remind the new government in Germany that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, now that's a new pipeline laid across the Baltic Sea, has been completed and is ready for operation. All that remains is for Germany to provide operating permits. So that additional source of supply is certainly a welcome remedy to the current crisis. Nevertheless, it would deepen the EU's dependence upon Russia, which could, and in the future, cause additional political considerations and perhaps will broaden the call for carbon neutral, sustainable energy sources even more urgently than before. So, in conclusion, yes, we are seeing increased inflationary pressure, and we may need to revise downward the annual growth expectations for the EU. However, the situation is still far from the 1970s era stagflation problems that plagued the United States. Taken all together, this is indeed another bump in the road to recovery, but it is no reason to change course.